Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
I am that dude, Bodkins. Patty to patty. It's ridiculous. No way. There's nobody else out there. He's your guy. Give a big round of applause for the one and only BodkinShow. I'm going to repeat that again, folks. I didn't stutter. Welcome to the Bodkins Show. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another great episode of the Bodkin Show. I am that dude, Bodkins. Of course, this is our Sunday evening sit-down show. And boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, do we have a doozy? If you missed Wednesday's show, please check that out after this. As me and Johnny and we had Matt Larson come on, and we talked a little Super Bowl, talked a little college basketball, and the NBA trade deadline. But tonight's show is a little special, folks. We're coming even to you a little earlier than what we normally do because, hey, when a man says, this is the time I got, you got to give him this time, and you go ahead and forge forward and make your plans to tailor this guy. Our guest tonight is none other than two-time ACC Coach of the Year, one-time Conference Coach of the Year, son of a Hall of Famer and a pretty damn good coach himself. Welcome to the program, the one and only Coach Tommy Bowden. Coach, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on this Sunday night down the Panhandle of Florida.
I appreciate it. I'm all the way in Missouri. Coach, I just want to jump right into it. You son of a Hall of Fame football coach. You're not bad yourself. Was it always football for you right of the way because it was in your blood, or was there anything else that ever interested
you? Nothing really. I kind of made up my mind early. I wanted to go into college coaching. Had my father been a high school coach, I probably wouldn't have been a high school coach. Had he been a banker, I'd probably been a banker. But he was the coach. Now, at that time when I went into coaching, he wasn't a big name, really successful coach. He was just kind of starting his career. But I made the decision early.
Okay, you played football at West Virginia too. Was that during your dad's time, or did you play for your dad, or was that?
I played for him for 4 years. I was redshirted. He left and went to Florida State. Played my last year for a guy named Frank Signetti, who's a Hall of Fame coach himself. Just passed away maybe 6 months ago. But I stayed and played for him 1 year. Then went into coaching after my last year at West Virginia.
So I want to talk a little bit about that time at West Virginia. Like, coming out of high school, like, how was that? Was it like, hey, I'm just going to go play for my pops because, well, he's going to whoop my butt if I don't play for him? Or were you looking at other schools there too?
I was looking at a lot of schools. They just weren't looking at me. I was about 5'9", 145 pounds out of high school. So I had to walk on at West Virginia, redshirted, played on the scout team. Then as a redshirt freshman, kind of worked my way up on special teams. Ended up starting my last 2 years, but I was not recruited. Typical overachiever, coming out of high school. That's something I wanted to do. A goal of mine was to play at West Virginia, so I had to work hard to do it. But I was overlooked for a good reason because I wasn't very big and wasn't very fast.
Hey, coach's son, first one in, last one out, right?
Exactly. Especially when I had one advantage. My mother was sleeping with a head coach.
Exactly. Hey, but he didn't cut you no favors. It didn't sound like getting redshirted he didn't even, like you alluded to, only played started 1 year for him.
Now, I remember he said one time, his son, you can't be as good because he said, you're going to have to be better. So I really had to work hard to really play at a higher level than the guys in front of me. Therefore, he could justify playing me and head of the scholarship players. He eventually put me on scholarship. But again, for a couple of years, I put food on his table, winning games for him.
What were the car rides home, especially them early years when, you weren't on scholarship? Were they pretty tough, or did Dad ever threaten to kick you off and say, hey, I'm going to get somebody else?
No, I was, being a walk-on and became a head coach, I was always partial toward walk-ons. And when I was a wide receiver coach at Alabama, I coached a walk-on named Dabo Sweeney. I ended up hiring him at Clemson. So I was always partial toward walk-ons, but you really have to pay your dues. You're put down the scout team. You usually play scout team running back at my size, and you're beat up. You can't ever be right. As a scout team, and once you do it right, you have to. If you do it really good, you have to run it again. Defense knows what's coming. They beat the fire out of you, so you pay your dues. It was worth it. But again, you really have to, you sit the bench for a while, and you play the scout team for a while, play special teams, and then kind of work your way up the ladder.
So after you knew obviously the NFL and those dreams weren't happening, you said directly the whole time, are you just prepping yourself while you're in college in West Virginia? Hey, I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna become a coach.
As soon as I got through playing, it was probably December. Then I immediately went to the football office, talked to the head coach, a guy named Frank Signetti, and said, I want to help out any way I can. So I was what you would call a student assistant. I was still a student, but all my spare time was spent at the football office and meeting rooms, doing whatever the coaches wanted me to do on through spring. Back that time, Morgantown was 60 miles away from Pittsburgh. We had to fly prospects into Pittsburgh. So I would drive up there and pick them and drive them into Morgantown, take them back. So it's just really kind of cutting your teeth on just what they call gopher work, going here and going there. But I immediately started into coaching after I got through playing and bounced around a little bit as a graduate assistant until I nailed down my first full-time job.
And where was that at, Coach?
My first full-time job was actually in the secondary at East Carolina University. A guy named Ed Emery, who has since passed away, became the head coach, hired me as the secondary coach, stayed there 4 months, then went to Auburn to coach running backs in 1980 for a guy named Doug Barfield.
You did. You went and coached Auburn.
Yeah.
Okay.
I stayed a couple years at West Virginia, a couple years at Florida State as a GA, and then got a full-time job and stayed there 4 months and went to Auburn to coach running backs in 1980. Stayed there 6 months. He got fired. I was back to a GA and kind of thrown back a couple steps and had to start over again.
That time at Auburn, is that Bo Jackson era? Was that?
No, that was before him. We had a all-pro running back, played, I think, for the Cincinnati Bengals, named James Brooks.
Okay.
That's a little while ago, but a great NFL back, great college back. Played at Auburn, coached him, and then I left and had to go back to Florida State and start over. But that was before Bo Jackson.
Okay. And then talk to me. I know eventually you got on first coaching job there at Tulane, head coaching job at Tulane. Is that right?
Yeah. I spent went to Auburn in 1990 with a guy named Pat Dye as his offensive coordinator. Then my brother Terry came in, stayed with him about 5 years. 90 to about 96. Yeah, about 5 or 6 years. Then 1997 became the head coach at Tulane. That was my first head coaching job, and stayed there 2 years.
One of them years you went undefeated, Coach, and that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about. That undefeated season where you guys weren't even getting like highly ranked, you weren't even being offered, to play in these big bowl games. Is that something you look back on and like, man, if maybe in today's world where everybody's kind of watching, got eyes on everything with the internet and ESPN and the way the playoff system is that something you look back on and say, man, if we could play in today's game, we would have had a chance?
Yeah, we would have had a chance back then simply because of our style of offense. That we kind of married the no huddle, fast break offense. A guy named Rich Rodriguez was the offensive coordinator and brought a lot of that stuff with him. So we married that. We're kind of ahead of the curve in offensive football. That particular year, we went undefeated. The only other undefeated team was Tennessee, who happened to beat my father in a really close game for the national championship. But I really think we could have given. My father was down as third team quarterback at Florida State. I think we could have given it a better game. Might have had a chance to beat in Tennessee, but they only picked 2 teams back then, so we kind of got left out. Ended up, I think we ended up 7th in the nation after we played in the Liberty Bowl, beat Brigham Young pretty significantly, and moved up to about 7th when we finished the year.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Rich Rod. He went on to West Virginia and had great success. That you guys in Tulane with Rich Rod and West Virginia, you guys were kind of the like you said, ahead of the curve of what we call now modern football, right? Like these spread it out, kind of use our speed against a lot of people.
Really, I hired him from a place called Glenville State up in West Virginia, small, maybe NAIA school. He was just knocking it dead, breaking all kind of offensive records. I had a past relationship with him, and then I worked for a guy named Homer Smith at Alabama, an offensive coordinator that introduced me to the shotgun and the no huddle and hand signals and things like that. So Rich and I was a pretty good combination, pretty good marriage. We both wanted to do the same thing. Tulane was the perfect environment. Had a quarterback named Sean King, inherited some really good wide receivers and some tough old hard-nosed offensive linemen, and put an offense together that nobody at that time was really marrying for a 60-minute game. The no-huddle fast break offense, shotgun. Teams were going into a 2-minute situation right before the first half, but we went right from the get-go, right from the first snap to the end of it, and caught most of college football defenses off balance at that time.
Yeah, Sean King, former Tampa Bay Buccaneer. That Sean King led him to the NFC Championship game for to connect the dots for people out there. He went on to be pretty successful. So the 2 years at Tulane, obviously that parlayed into the Clemson job. Talk to me about them negotiations and what led you go on to coach at Clemson.
Well, timing is very important in anything that you do, and it surely is in coaching. I bounced around for about 19 years as an assistant. I had about eight jobs that I was really interested in. I said, man, if I can ever be fortunate enough, God can bless me to be a head coach at one of these schools. At that particular time, it was Alabama, Auburn, LSU. Those were the top teams, and then Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. I really liked Clemson, or my earlier career at Duke in the 1980s. We played Clemson. I liked the environment and the fanaticism. And then North Carolina. I just thought being at Clemson and watching what Mac Brown did up there, he had a couple of 10-win seasons. It's a great football state. North Carolina, is kind of the state school and it's got a lot of influence in that state. So I said, man, if I could ever get one of those jobs, I'd be very fortunate. I happened to go undefeated at Tulane. Clemson came open. They called, and Tulane offered me a little more money to stay, but I just felt like money for assistants, facilities, tradition, history, the Clemson move was the right move.
And you had successful years there, 2-time ACC Coach of the Year. Talk to me about those years at Clemson. I mean, you kind of helped build that program back into what we know as today, because like you alluded to, once you left, you hired Dabo Swinney, and now he's got that program winning a couple national championships. So you kind of rebuilt that from the ground up.
Well, I think I inherited Clemson. They were coming off a 3-win season, and then we immediately went to the bowl the first year. I think won 6 games, maybe 7, won 9 the next year, and then started recruiting a little bit better. When I went there, Clemson had not scored a touchdown against Florida State in 10 years. They didn't get a touchdown. That's 5 trips to Tallahassee. And then we lost the first 4. Then we won the last 4 out of 5. Started recruiting better. We got better players. That's usually the team with the best players usually wins. So we started to close that talent gap. Florida State at that particular time had 14 top 5 finishes in the nation. It's a record that stands, and I don't know if there's anybody really, really close to it, that kind of record. So they were the dominant team. We closed the gap. Facilities, we just were fixed to get into a facilities building, about $55 million. Took about 9 years with the red tape and bureaucracy and all that. So started to get it turned around, and then they made the change and recommended Dabo, and he took that thing to a level, and they've been a really, really competitive national contender, for the last 6-7 years.
Yeah, I would say last 5 or 6 years he's had them in the playoffs, or 2 national titles. So I lost one, I think, to Alabama even back then. Coach, let me ask you, what was like what just made you? Is it just because it's in your blood, like in your dad, like to continue that grind? Because like that's what we hear is from even like former players. It's like that coach life is something like you got to be a special breed of person to be that coach, to stay up. And even college coaches, even worse than pros, because there's no off season, right? Because once season ends, you're going to recruit, you're going to try to pitch this kid and that. What made you just keep doing it all these years from even at a grad student? Did you ever just say like, man, this isn't the life for me? Or, I mean, you just didn't ever quit.
Well, you got to have a lot of patience and perseverance. Those are the first two things my father told me. Was put me on the plane when I took my first full-time job in East Carolina. He said, son, in this profession, you better have patience. You better have perseverance. I saw that from my father. I had a brother, Terry, in the profession, a brother, Jeff, in the profession. So I was well aware of the workload. If you're not careful in college coaching, you coach everybody's children other than your own. And it's tough on your marriage, tough on your children, the amount of time you have to spend. So I was aware of that. I thought my father was a good example of how to balance the time and the quality family time. So I try to do the same thing. We happen to be football's a profession, a lot of stress, a lot of volatility, a lot of pressure. You need balance. You need something to center your life. I come from a very strong Christian family. So a relationship with Christ gave us that balance, gave us that kind of foundation with the ups and downs and the pressures of college coaching. So I was fortunate to have a successful father. And then, I coached at some great places: Alabama, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida State, Duke. Those are some great places to coach college football. And then we won at most of them. Then I became a head coach. We were successful. So that helped staying in the profession.
Coach, let me ask you too, what was, when you would go into your as your head coach, when you would go into a kid's home, what was your kind of approach at Clemson to try to get those kids to maybe leave not go to Alabama or an Auburn and come to Clemson, or even North Carolina, because like you said, they're kind of the number one school in the state there?
Well, when I recruited at Auburn, Alabama, and recruited against Clemson, I would go in there and say, listen, son, why do you want to go to Clemson? It's a small town. There's nothing for you to do. Why would you want to go there? And then all of a sudden you get to Clemson and you find out, wait a minute, if I'm a mother giving away my 17-year-old son, I want him to get two things. Number one, get an education, and then hopefully prepare himself to go to the NFL. Well, at a place like Clemson, that's all there is. There's nothing to do but possibly, getting your education, going to the NFL. We used to tell them, when I was at Clemson, if you don't get in trouble, you got to drive to Columbia, where South Carolina is, and then go up in Columbia and get in trouble, or go up there to Greenville. But you had to go looking for trouble because it was a small town. So when you're at a school, you sell the pluses of that university. Sure, it's a fine education, academic at school. Like everybody's going to tell you that. And there's a bunch of coaches that are great salesmen, but every little college town has its own strengths and minuses. The fact that Clemson's a small town, you can talk about a family environment. It's the size of a town where it actually could happen. And then there's not a lot of distractions. And you go to a larger town, it's got a major city. There's a lot of a lot of negative influences that can come into the program, whereas at Clemson doesn't have those. So that, and you teach the facilities, the fanaticism, the fan base. There's a lot of pluses, but Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, all your competition has the same thing. There has to be something unique about the school that draws them there.
Coach, I got to ask you, I mean, you alluded to playing Florida State. You guys would play them a lot being in the same conference at the time. Coaching against your dad, the quote unquote Bowden Bowl. How was dinners at Thanksgiving and those things, and then you had your brother that you guys coached against too at the same time. What was Thanksgiving dinner like? A lot of bad blood, or no football? Mom say no football talk at dinner. How did that happen?
That's the most people think the same thing as you do. Hey, how were those Thanksgiving dinners? But with myself, I usually played South Carolina. My father's played in the University of Florida. All the rivalry games were playing that Thanksgiving weekend. So we never had Thanksgiving together. We were always with the team. Yeah. And then people say, well, gosh, I bet those Christmas dinners were something. You and your father. No, you better be in a bowl game. If you're not going to be in a bowl game, you're going to be unemployed. And so I was always in a bowl game as a head coach. I always qualified for a bowl game. My father's in a bowl game. So our summer vacations were the time where we got together, big family vacation, all my brothers and sisters, my father and my mother. That's when we would have the discussion that you're talking about. But it was 6 months after the game.
Long forgot, right?
Long forgotten unless you won. Then if you won, you sure brought it up. And you talked about it for 7 straight days.
When you were on the losing end, how did those conversations go?
Well, for mine is very short. I don't want to talk a lot. But my father and I, we talked all the time. Even when we played each other, we talked once or twice during that week. But the guy that wins got bragging rights. And when he won the first four, it was pretty serious. They hired me to beat him. And all of a sudden, he lost 4 out of 5 and said, "Hey, wait a minute, we hired you to beat your son." So my mother couldn't hardly win. But she chose the credit card, which was my father. He had the credit card.
Right.
That was her. That was her loyalty.
I was gonna say, how did Mama had to handle? I don't know how Mom could handle all that with her sons just battling out. I mean, you see the Kelsey brothers at the Super Bowl, and then, but Miss Bowden over here's got husband battling sons battling sons, multiple times of the year during those times.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of excitement that first year. A father and son at that level had never played each other. Bowden Bowl, ESPN televised it. They caught her in the stands with a split sweatshirt, garnet on one side, orange on the other. So it was fun until I about beat him. He won the national championship that year, and I had it 14-3 at halftime, and about beat him. We missed a field goal late to put it into overtime. So it was fun up until it gets that much at stake. And then he won those next few by a large margin. It wasn't fun for me at all until I started winning. So there wasn't the conversations were short for the loser. The winner had bragging rights, especially on that family vacation.
Hey, there you go, Coach. I just got a few more questions because I know you're limited on time. Coach, are you still involved in it all, or like you haven't you haven't like been out there? Are you involved in the game at all? You following it?
I did TV for 8 or 9 years after I got through coaching. Then my father got sick, and passed away. Then my father-in-law got sick, and he passed away. So I got grandsons. So I got out of TV. I do a lot of faith-based or Christian speaking now, and then I've got a show similar to yours tomorrow night. I do one. Several of them during the season. So I really stay only through Zoom calls, podcasts, radio shows. So I stay really involved with football. But other than that, my brother Terry is still a head coach at University of Louisiana Monroe. He's still involved. So I follow it some. But I have to stay up on it because I do enough radio, Zoom podcast stuff where I got to be able to talk a little bit about it. And the NIL and transfer portal, gives you something to really look at because the game is changing, and that makes it really interesting from a fan standpoint or an ex-coach's standpoint.
And I want to get your thoughts there too on the game is, in the last 5 years, really the last 2 years, it's just it just changed tremendously. When you were coaching, there was no NIL deals. There wasn't even you had to sit out if you transferred. And if even to get play, there's guys playing 5-6 years now. Dang near. We see Benson Stennett. He's 30 years old throwing national touchdown, playing in the national championship game. How would you handle today's game with the transfer portal and the NIL deals and all that?
It's really, really hard because I was kind of an aggressive coach, hands-on coach. You coach wideouts, you got to yell a long ways because they run different. I was a loud coach, and nowadays you yell at them, they'll leave. If you make them go to class, they'll leave. You punish them for getting caught marijuana or breaking curfew, they'll take off on you. So you really have to be careful how you discipline your players. And then the NIL money, you remember when you got the death penalty? Years, I don't know if you remember that. Well,
Eric Dickerson,
Craig James,
and
well, now that's legal.
Right.
So, but you got to have money. There's a lot of schools, and a lot of the group of 5 schools don't have the money that the Power 5 school. I think that's going to force us into two different leagues, and I think the Power 5s are going to get a commissioner and go their own way and have some NIL rules about the salary cap like the NFL. But it's made college football, unfortunately, more businesslike and more like the NFL. And if you could, back in the 1890s or 1900s when college football was introduced on the college campuses, it was supposed to be a part of the college experience, not the college experience. And right now, the tail's wagging the dog as far as these college presidents, NCAA, and it's I don't think it's a good thing, unfortunately. toothpaste is out of the tube.
And you saw Clemson. We kind of talked about it, and you had Dabo on your staff. You hired him. Are you happy to see that success with Dabo and Clemson kind of rise to be, the national championship and in conversations every year to win it?
Yeah, my children graduated from Clemson. The 10 years I had, I really enjoyed my 10 years there. I had a really good relationship with Dabo. Did a really good job for me as a player and as a coach. So great success for them. They were really first class last year. They flew my wife and I up there when they played Florida State, recognized my father in a special ceremony there during the game. So Clemson has been a first class school, and I had a great experience there, and wish nothing but them and him, Dabo, the best. And he has surely done a great job for them.
Coach, we just got one comment here, and I want to ask you this too. So CK Landez says, thanks you, Coach. What's the loudest stadium you ever coached in the SEC? Razorback. He's a Razorback fan for life. So
Razorback fan for life. I about went there twice.
I think he told me that, actually. He's a good friend of mine. He told me that when I told him you were going to
I about went there twice. The loudest, I'm going to tell you probably the best environment and could be the loudest. I always thought LSU at night was the best environment in college football. But that goes back to the time, and I don't know if you remember or familiar with that stadium, but that's when the students used to live in the stadium. They made it a dorm. I don't know if you knew that or not. It was a student housing dorm underneath in the stadium, all around it. And those students would start drinking in the morning. Those cages would come in there, and they would start tailgating and drinking. And you bring that bus in there at night, and they're about rocking that thing. They planted that live tiger outside the visitors' dressing room. When you come out of the dressing room, they got that live tiger in a cage. They start poking it with that daggone prod, getting it to roar, and they're juiced up pretty good. By the time you kick off at 8 o'clock, there's a lot of firewater been consumed in that daggone stadium. I thought that was the best environment in college football, and could have been the loudest too. But I saw the overall environment. I thought it was great.
Tommy Weaver, who I know, he says, thanks for everything, Coach. He's a big Clemson guy. So
great. They got great fans.
Coach, I got to ask you one question before we get you out of here. You've been around football your whole life. Played it. Obviously followed in your dad's a legendary football coach in his own right, Hall of Famer. You had a great, successful career yourself. Is there one player, whether it would have been recruiting or you coached against or played or coached for, that you were like, this guy is one of one, the most special dude I've ever seen on a football field?
You coach so many players, as assistant head coach, you hate to nail it down to one.
I know that's a tough question, Coach. That's why it's the last question.
Then you get 5 or 6 that yell at you. But I had an athlete at Clemson named Gaines Adams. He was the 4th overall pick in the draft in the first round. He's since passed away. He passed away at 26. First round pick for Tampa Bay. But he was a great athlete, great attitude, great parents, played defensive end, great pass rusher. Those pass rushing edge rushers are big money guys in the NFL. But but I had other players too. But a guy named C.J. Spiller that broke a lot of records at Clemson.
Yeah, I remember C.J.
First round pick for the Buffalo Bills. Is coaching their running backs now. But another great player. I had a great wide receiver, played in the NFL for a little bit, named Rod Gardner. All of those are when I was at Clemson, but you got to take Sean King at Tulane, that quarterback, played a little in the NFL, but just a great quarterback player. Deion Sanders is the guy that played for my father, and I communicated with not long ago when he went to Colorado, and then spoke at my father's funeral. But if I had to pick one guy in college football that either my father or myself or coached, it'd probably be him.
Yeah, I think Deion. I think he's going to do incredible things at Colorado. I just think it's going to. I think I'm excited for that program because at one time it was a really good program, and it just the last 20 years has kind of gone down. And I can't wait to see what Deion does because I watch him and I hear what he says, and I'm a believer. Like I'm not. I was ready to run through the wall for the guy, and I'm not even I'm not, he's not recruiting me.
I'm not only happy for Colorado. I'm happy for college football, because he's going to bring a maybe a little bit WWF element to college football, and a little spice. He's just got a different personality. I think he's going to be successful. I don't think it's going to be detrimental to having success in college football. I think it'll be an asset, but he's going to bring a little flair and a little personality that college football has not seen, has never seen.
But I think we expect it from Prime, we expect it from him,
Yeah, and the thing about it, I don't think it's not going to be so much of a show. It is going to be a show, but he does it in a way that's going to be able to have success. I've watched about every video that I think his son's his video guy, and I've watched every one of those things. And the staff he's hired, the way he talks to his team, the way he handles support personnel. I tell you, I'm taking notes if I ever go back and coaching from him. But I've been really impressed with him.
Have you ever thought about coming back, Coach? I know you said that you're doing the religious coach, the religious speaking, and you do a lot of the podcasts. Is the itch ever going to come back?
I dreamed about it one night, and all of a sudden I woke up. It was a nightmare, and I said, no. I was getting flashbacks. It's amazing because my father coached till he was 80. My brother Terry's 67, still coaching. And do you remember Frank Broyles and Darryl Royal? Do you remember those two guys?
I don't think so, Coach.
Frank Broyles was the head coach at Arkansas and a very successful head coach, Hall of Fame coach, was the AD for a long time. Darryl Royal, Hall of Fame head coach, University of Texas for a long time. Both of them won a lot of games, Hall of Fame. They both retired at 55. And somehow that got in my mind. So I had planned to coach to about my mid-50s, and I enjoy what I'm doing now. I want to look at TV for a little bit. So when that AD came in and when I was 54 and made the decision for me, I said, that's about when I planned it anyway. So let's do something else. I have no desire, but I enjoy watching it, but have no desire to go back.
Coach, before you get out of here, before we get out of here, go ahead and where can everybody watch your podcasts and shows that you do?
Well, I do a lot of Christian speaking, but it's all word of mouth, and I'll speak at a church, and they'll put it on their websites. But as far as I don't do a podcast, I'm on a lot of podcasts.
Oh, okay.
I'm on a lot of them and do a lot of radio shows, but I don't have one myself. Most of my speaking is word of mouth, and I'll go from Iowa to Kansas to Texas I just got back from Virginia, and I'm headed up to Illinois and all over, pretty much speaking, but it's all. It's all just wherever I speak. Most of them put it on YouTube or something.
I got you. I appreciate it, Coach. It's been a blessing. Right. I thank you so much for joining me.
Do it again when football starts.
Hey, we will, Coach. Thank you so much. Hey, we'll have to get your thoughts when the season starts.
All righty. Have a good evening.
Hey, I appreciate it, Coach. Thank you.
All righty.
Hey, folks, it's been another great episode of the Bodkin Show. I mean, the legendary Tommy Bowden is getting out of here. Man, I can't thank Dan Harris, first of all, enough for getting me Tommy Bowden. He's the one that hooks it all up. Special shout out to him. He's the one that books my guest you guys see on Sundays. He got Derek Brown and Tommy Bowden for me. There's no way I could ever do this without him on the Let's Talk Sports Network. So shout out to Dan Harris. I tell people the most selfless person I've ever met. But I'm going to hit that outro. Be a friend. Tell a friend, folks. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the share button. It's been a pleasure. I will be back. I'm not going to be back tomorrow night on Bodkin's Buffoon, but Tanner and the boys will be there. I'm going to got some family things I'm going to be doing. So I'll be back on Thursday, though, with another great episode of the Bodkin Show with Johnny Cruz joining me as always. Can't wait. This was a great one. Coach Bowden, y'all. So it's been a pleasure. I'm going to hit that outro. Be a friend, tell a friend, like, subscribe, share. You guys know what to do. It was a real one.